Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Mike. This is the Leadership Toolkit. As you know, it's your definitive leadership growth podcast. It's your opportunity to tune in and get in with people that have done it and are doing it. They're doing the thing that you want to be able to do so that you have the opportunity to grow and listen to their successes. Also, we all talk, and especially people that are in leadership and entrepreneurship, if they've been any length of time, it's always clear that we grow and we fail forward. So that's one of those things that we want to talk about as well as we get into these shows. We just have open conversations with awesome leaders from all different verticals of business. Today is no exception. I have got Doug Gray, Ph.D. on the show. He's a outcome focused or outcome based leader. He does leadership development, publishes books. His clients ask, what really works? And that's one of the things on this show is like, hey, what really works? So we're going to get into that conversation today. So ladies and gentlemen, Doug Gray, nice to have you on the show today, Doug.
My pleasure. Glad to help. Hope it's useful for folks.
Absolutely. So if you would just take a moment and if you would kind of share the 1 or 2 minute elevator pitch, what is your background in leadership? How did you get into it? And let's have some conversation around that.
Well, I've always focused on leadership development. It's kind of the thread line. And I'm in my 60s, so now I've got gray hair. But I sometimes
look
do
the part.
Yeah, I guess. I do this by decades. So as a kid, I had formative mentors in Boy Scouts, and I was an Eagle Scout. And then playing hockey, I had a lot of coaches who were marvelous. That was mostly in upstate New York. And my family. So I was born in Denver and moved a lot. My dad was a Methodist minister for a while and then became an academic. So when you're exposed to different academics, you sometimes get different perspectives. In my 20s, it was outward bound and leadership development, wilderness environments, and working in private schools, prep schools for a decade. 4 different schools, different geographies. And when I met my wife at a prep school in New Hampshire, we got married 36 years ago, and I pulled her to Minnesota, where my roots were, but that didn't work. So then we moved to D.C. for 10 years, and with her career, down to Charlotte for 10 years, and now we're in Nashville for 10 years. But my work's always been with business leaders. Started my company in 97. How's that?
Hey, perfect. So it's crazy because we talked a little bit and you asked me a lot of good questions before we went live. It's That's interesting. Right. So you said, raised in Denver, I'm in Colorado Springs. Right. You brought up playing hockey. I played hockey for 20 years and coached for as many, both ice and inline hockey.
In Denver?
In Colorado Springs here. I mean, just played and we'd go down to Colorado College and so forth and play in their beer leagues and the local leagues around here and so forth. So it was a lot of fun. So I should, when you said, hey, pulled to Minnesota, I mean, that certainly makes sense, right? So as we get into having some conversation today, some of the presentation topics, some of the things that you brought up when we talk about leadership, one of the things that I really want to get into, or two things that I wanted to bring up, and you're clearly an expert on. One of the things that I think leaders don't do often enough, we get in and we're working in the business. We're working on all the things. We're doing all the stuff. And one of the notes you put here said, hey, let's talk about identifying threats and opportunities on your team. I've heard that called, and you're probably familiar with, like a SWOT analysis, SWOT, so strength, weakness, opportunities, threats. So how do you get to that point as a leader where we're talking, okay, I'm in leadership and everything's going along and everything seems to be going okay. At what point do you get into talking about, threats, opportunities, that sort of deal? If everything's seemingly fine, why would we go there, Doug?
Well, the short answer to that model is that the strengths and weaknesses are individual level and the opportunities and threats are team level, right?
Okay.
And you and I can't control the opportunities and threats. So what do you focus on? If you choose to focus on your strengths and weaknesses, that will suggest certain options and courses of action. My last call was with a vendor who wants to use an AI-assisted coaching program that I developed.
Okay.
So my other response to you is, why not put it into a cleverly written prompt on your favorite AI tool something like just craft a good prompt. What are the strengths and weaknesses of the Leadership Toolkit hosted by Mike Phillips? What topics should he consider, and who are the guests that he ought to reach out to in the next decade? And what are their contact names and topics and such? In other words, when we lead toward a larger library, we're going to get different sets of data, different results.
Sure.
From my background, I've got a book problem. So there are lots of books in the world. AI is just like a large library. So, Mike, I'm going to throw a question at you.
Okay.
How do you define artificial intelligence? For instance, in 3 words.
How do I define artificial intelligence in 3 words? Machine learning. I need 4 words. Machine learning and instruction.
I love it. You did it. Well, thanks for playing.
Yeah, machine learning ampersand instruction. There, it's 3 words in a symbol.
You want to goose it. Well, I think we often think of tools like AI as something that's machine driven. What if it's broader? What if it's human learning? And what if it's defined as digitized human learning? How broad is that? So if you imagine a timeline, and maybe as a species, we've been around for 500,000 years or something, and we've got all this vocal knowledge sharing that eventually was written from Sanskrit to everything we've got today.
Sure.
And all of that data can be digitized. So now when you reach out and ask that large library, how do you define leadership? What are toolkits for leadership? What really works? What's a practical tool? It's like asking a larger library. I went to some of the finest colleges in the world. So at some of the biggest colleges, you've got tremendous libraries with rare books that are only accessible to those students and faculty. We've got that now at our fingertips, which implies that we're aggressively learning or we're lazy. So thanks for playing the game.
How do you know which one it is? Are we aggressively learning or are we lazy?
How much do you use AI?
I mean, I use it. I use it for this show regularly. I mean, I think it's one of those things. However, I will say I use it, and I use the word "but" sparingly. You can probably appreciate that with your degrees. The reason I say I use it, but I use it as thought starters. I don't think there's my opinion, especially when it comes to leadership, when it comes to humans and human interaction, I don't think you're ever going to have a replacement for genuine human, interaction and learning. Now, I think AI can make a great right seat. I mean, I think I have it programmed on my phone. My preferred AI still is ChatGPT. I've used probably all of them because I do digital marketing for a living. So I've tested all the stuff, right? But I do think it is not but there. And I think it's important that we learn to utilize it. You commented a minute ago, you said, well, pick your favorite AI and so forth. I think, yes, there's the opportunity to have a favorite AI, but there are also some real good niche models. Sometimes you might say, hey, this is my favorite. Like I said, I prefer a ChatGPT when I'm bouncing stuff off of that, or I need a question answered, or I need a thought to get started. But there's plenty of times that the Google AI will work better on things, or especially like with it tied into your email and so forth, where it's offering suggestions, or that Claude will work better. So I think that's one of those. I'll close this thought on, well, there isn't a replacement, in my opinion, for genuine human interaction and input. And I think used properly, it can be a great tool. People are scared of it though right now.
So let's not go to the fear-based side of our brains, our limbic system. Let's go to the prefrontal cortex.
Absolutely.
So for instance, that we can use it for asking questions, like you first stated. I think curiosity is the currency of learning. So if you use AI, for instance, to ask questions, you can also tweak the prompt. You can take a response from OpenAI and put it into Claude or put it into Grok and put it into Perplexity and ask in each of those examples, what am I missing?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like asking 4 experts for some insights into a leadership toolkit. Pick your topic.
Right.
And you and I are of an age where we'll probably go on YouTube for how to fix whatever. Last
I
weekend,
do that regularly. How to fix, and then I go and attempt it. Most of the time, I'm successful.
There you go. Well, our kids don't. They'll go to OpenAI and ask, how do I fix whatever? In other words, their go-to now is the AI tools. We've now got AI browsers that are being piloted. What's that mean for decision making? What's it mean for leaders and managers, for instance, who are fearful? Or what's it mean for those who don't have a closed system, a smaller LLM versus an open system where they're populating OpenAI because they don't know any better? One of my clients this morning shared that concern, and he said, we're rolling it out. We finally made an investment into a subscription for our industry. Happens to be a manufacturing industry that uses AI to automate some of the workflows that they've always had with estimating projects. And they're a big company. They're growing fast, and they're doing a lot of things really well. This, for them, is a massive step. And the leader is in his 50s, dad's in his 70s, and you can guess that there's a little tension there because it's family-owned business, so it's closely held, and they're going to make quicker decisions than a publicly traded company.
Sure.
But how they make those decisions, I think, is going to become critically important over time. So if any of your listeners are reluctant to use AI, I think that would be a tool to consider embracing. One link is at JITCoach, JITcoach.com, and I launched that in January, in part because I had this URL 10 years ago, tried to sell it to Target and Ingersoll Rand and a bunch of others when I was managing executive coaches, and thought, don't you need a just-in-time coach? And they said, well, what a clever idea. No, we're not interested at that time. The world's caught up with us. The technology's caught up with us. And it's possible now to launch examples like that are tools that people can use immediately to make better decisions. The second example is an app. Replit and Lovable are 2 examples that are changing our world. So I'll give you a second link, family-wealth.com is a directory. And if you scroll down just a little bit, there's a free assessment tool that anybody can use to immediately assess the strengths and weaknesses of their businesses. So this is better than a SWOT analysis for a couple of reasons. It's short, it's shorter, and it's using a bunch of my research and a bunch of my consulting over the decades to help people immediately look at 6 different categories, plot it, and then click another button and get a business valuation immediately. They can also access a bunch of content. I've got over 200 videos, and then they've got on YouTube. And they can ask the AI for specific answers for anything. I think this is where we're headed. When I think about assessment tools like that, I'm not an expert, really. I know what the topic and content ought to be, but I've got marketing people, and I got a guy who does the JITCoach stuff, because they bring the learning and development expertise, and they bring the technological expertise, and they make it look good. I know what the outcome ought to be, but I don't know how to get there. And I think that's an example of where most of your listeners are probably. We're all stumbling. And the question becomes, what tools do you pick up? How's that for a rant? A bit of a rant?
No, I love it. I'm bringing myself back on the screen, but I always sit here and take notes as I'm listening. And so there's a couple things that really stand out in that. And I appreciate, I love a good rant, man. Okay. I love it when somebody gets going, because that just leads to deeper conversation. So a couple of things that you pointed out there, and I'm going to remind my listeners of, I put it up here on the screen, but if they're listening later, maybe on Apple or Spotify, it was JITcoach.com. I have that spelled right? JITCoach.com. That's just in time coach, right? JITCoach.com. So that can give you, feedback, leadership feedback. I'm assuming, and so forth. You dove into that a little bit, and then you brought up that there's a free assessment tool. They can check out family-wealth.com. So FAMILY-WEALTH.com.
It's
The
actually
dash
.org.
link. What's that?
It's a .org, but
It's .org. Okay, got it. Let me correct that on the screen for future use. Family-wealth.org.
it's amazing to me that that URL was available
Yeah, no kidding. That's crazy.
last year.
So I would encourage people to go check those out. I would also encourage people, as I've had some of this on the screen a few times, but again, if you're listening to the audio, and I always share this stuff in the show notes, and do me a favor, if you're listening, whether you're on the audio, on the video, throw some thumbs up on there. Make sure you share the show. That's one of the ways that the Leadership Toolkit continues to grow. So you can connect with Doug on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com/in/Doug Gray, Gray-PhD. That's his link. But if you look up Doug Gray, PhD, he'll show right up there. And then his main website as well, I've had on the screen a few times, action-learning.com. I'm surprised that one was available too. It's common spelling, action-learning.com. So you can check those things out.
I bought that one in 95 or so.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. That was just when the .com boom was starting. So one of the things that you said there, you said, I have to know and correct me if I'm wrong, or I wrote it in my own words. You said, you're good at knowing the outcome. You're like, yeah, I know the outcome. Sometimes I don't always know the way to get there. And so when we're talking about AI, when it comes to AI and leadership and management, I think we can err on the side of, because you said earlier, something along the lines of we're either really smart and busy or we're lazy, right? I think we can err on the side of, well, I'm using AI for everything, and then I just am dependent on it, and that's where the laziness comes in. So when you're saying I know the outcome, what's that?
Let's not encourage anyone to do that.
No,
it's human oversight. And you probably know this, but I'm told that the majority of users are people who are looking for conversational links or resources. A lot of lonely people, a lot of people with questions. The danger becomes if you ask your OpenAI, how do I deal with a difficult person named Mike or Fred or George or Sam? How do I deal with my sales manager? They will give you scripts and content, and they'll validate you. They'll encourage you. Of course you can deal with this difficult person. And sometimes that's genuine and useful, and sometimes it's not useful. If the majority of our young people are dependent on that, I've met people who say, I don't need a therapist. I've got my AI therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And my question would be, what if you augmented your direct interactions with your manager, for instance, with an AI assisted tool that helps you practice the communication skills that are required so you can make your point and close a sale? Oh.
Well, and that was what I was going to say. When you're talking about, I need to know how to get there, I think it's really important to realize that also when it comes to AI and AI interactions, there's not a replacement for human discernment. You need to, and as we're talking to people, and that's one thing, and you're alluding to that, like we can't just solely rely on that because it is a machine learning model. And again, this is my opinion. I'm no expert either by any means. I use it a lot for a lot of stuff. I'll use it for anything from getting dinner ideas to getting, or I'll put my emails or even sometimes my show notes in, and I'll say, hey, here's what I typed, make it better.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But when I think it is important that we know the outcome. And then when we're talking about the how to get there, it does take some discernment. And I think it still takes real people on your team. So if you're using AI from a leadership and management perspective, and AI says to you, well, hey, here's the layout, here's the process, and it'll give you a really nice, beautifully laid out deal, the beautifully laid out outline, plan, process, whatever it may be. But, and this is the but, I think it's important that we realize it may or may not be tested. It's important to read those things ahead of time um, before we just go and deploy it. Right?
Let me give you another safety concern that you're
Sure.
touching on. That could be important to a lot of folks. When people go on OpenAI, if the button on the top says my questions and these responses can be used to train the instrument, they're really giving away information about their lives, whatever they feel is important. To be clear, Google's been gathering data forever, which is why you have that
Sure.
search index when you begin to type in how do I ... Well, many of my clients have quickly learned how to create a closed LLM, a smaller system that only keeps their information confidential. I created one called Gray Matters because one of my buddies has slandered and teased me and called me Gray Matter for decades. And the point is that it has my content, my research validated stuff, and then it's programmed only to share peer-reviewed sources like Google Scholar and to provide the sources in a URL. So
Interesting.
I give that to my clients. And I invite my clients to do the same thing with their business. So if, for instance, you're a manufacturer and you're obliged to submit a new estimate for the state of Colorado's requirements, compliance demands are always changing,
Yes.
then it will generate that, but it's not ever perfect. So one of the things that I think folks need to do is keep their proprietary business information proprietary. You could look already at the competitors who are hosting leadership podcasts. It will tell you how many listeners they have and how many downloads and how
Sure.
many subscribers and followers and all that stuff. So you could use those key metrics for your own competitive advantage. Same with any business. So one of my clients this morning is a controller in a different manufacturing business, and her job in part is to create those metrics because they don't have them. And
Interesting.
well, they don't have them yet, but just because 70% of our GDP is tied to family-owned businesses does not mean that they're organizationally mature. It means that it's more often verbal. Of course, we're going to work with this vendor in this way. And of course, we're going to exceed compliance requirements in the state of Colorado. But what are they again? And didn't they just change with that last legislation for whatever environmental or political reasons?
Yeah, about every 10 minutes here seems like
Okay.
something changes.
Maybe I shouldn't have picked Colorado. Sorry, Mike.
No, you're fine. So here's a couple questions because you brought up what do you use for a closed, or you brought up LLMs. First off, for some people that may not be familiar, what is an LLM?
Large language model. So most of the data that we see as consumers is based on words, narratives. Financial people have been using data sets like this for decades.
Sure.
The U.S. military and Department of Defense and all the contractors associated with them, thankfully, have been doing this kind of data gathering for decades, which is why remote battlefields are as secure as they are and why drones can immediately be employed in places like the Ukraine. And physicians have had remote access to data sets for decades, thankfully. We think of the TV show MASH that you and I probably grew up on.
Yep, absolutely.
Was sort of the Korean War, but sort of a metaphor for remote healthcare, right? And telehealth has certainly evolved as an example. I think closed systems are now a thing that your listeners would be familiar with. And if they're resistant, they can begin to practice.
Sure.
In any kind of an environment.
Well, and so one of the things that you brought up too, when we're developing stuff, what do you prefer to use to start developing a closed LLM? And I wanted you to expand on that because I think that's something we hear more commonly. I'm familiar, you're familiar, but I know that maybe not everybody is. And so that's what do you use? Do you have a recommendation, some preferred tools that you use in developing a closed LLM?
Well, I'll maybe start by mentioning a few pods that I use as resources.
Okay.
The A16Z podcast is Anderson Horowitz, and they're venture capitalists in Silicon Valley who invest in early stage tech companies.
Okay.
So the notion of spelling out Anderson and Horowitz led to 16 letters. So it's A, 16, and Z.
That's funny.
They've got a range of topics, and they're often endorsing new ones because they've got sort of their thumb on the pulse. So that's one answer. That's one kind of a place.
Sure.
To start.
No, that's a great place to start.
The second answer is ask any AI. So if you go to Claude.ai or Poe, or OpenAI or Grok, Grok, goof around. Perplexity, as it sounds, Perplexity, and then ask each of them, what other platforms would you recommend? It will list 5 to 10. And especially if you tweak the prompt and you just ask an intelligent question, not because you know the answer, but you want intelligent answers.
Sure.
So the more detailed the prompt is, the better. Like, could you provide 10 AI platforms that might be useful for a manager at a auto LKQ core shop, auto warehouse,
Sure.
to implement externally without endangering the IT protocols of the mothership of the big company. Now you've got a local warehouse manager who's using AI, and it could be on his private device. It might not be particularly secure.
Right.
So there are risks there, and that's a good example of a world where somebody would need a closed system.
Sure. Well, and I mean, yeah, I think you touched on that's huge, the compliance piece, right? Everyone thinks, oh, I can just spit this into my phone and ask whatever the flavor of the AI of the day is and so forth. But then that's a potential leak and so forth. The other,
Let's talk about that, Mike, because
yeah,
you and I might think of compliance in a certain way. OSHA safety requirements come to mind. But an economist is going to think about compliance in a very different way. A safety
yeah,
insurance vendor is going to look at mitigating risks. In other words, there's a half dozen different ways to track compliance requirements.
federal data compliance. Ironically, interestingly, I'm actually a trained compliance officer for our organization. So when we're getting into federal data compliance, people's personal information, your personal information, stuff on phones. I think that's where you're going with that is massive.
All that can be asked, and you can make sure that the answers, if you're going to do a workflow, if you're going to do an AI integration of any sort, can exceed by 10 or 15% all those requirements for whatever state you're working in, because it does vary state by state. Most folks think of compliance as but one thing. And as you know, it's probably 6 or 8.
Probably more than that, especially depending on the industry. You know, it's one of those things that most people that listen to this podcast know my background is automotive. And one of the things that Colorado so lovingly introduced some years ago is auto dealers where they're selling cars and so forth, but are starting in July, I want to say like 2019 probably, are treated with many of the same measures as banks and credit unions when it comes to like personal data compliance. So there's all these other pieces that come in, and it's like sometimes it's not just the one industry. It's like, well, you serve another industry, and that's one of the pieces of compliance too. And I know I may be getting off in the weeds here, but if you're doing business with another company, so let's say, you know, the Leadership Toolkit and Doug Gray and Action Learning, we enter into a contract and we say, hey, we're going to create this awesome, you know, coaching series or whatnot. Now it's also my responsibility, and leaders, managers, you got to hear this. It's then my responsibility to make sure not just that my company's compliant, but that Action Learning Associates and Doug Gray, his company, is compliant as well, or at least that I've done my due diligence to make sure that they say that they are.
That's right. Which we do for any business partner, any vendor. That's right.
Right. But it's I think it's more prevalent now than it has been in previous years, especially. And I think that is one of the things where, you know, a lot of the AI and online world have really thrusted that to the forefront. one of the comments that you made earlier, I'm going to pause here for a second too, so I don't forget. Again, I encourage anyone connect with Doug on LinkedIn. He's a brilliant mind. So make sure you connect with Doug on LinkedIn. You can check out his main website at action-learning.com, spelled just how it sounds. It's ACTION-LEARNING, action-learning.com. He mentioned earlier JITCoach, JITcoach.com, and also family, that didn't come up. Hit enter, family-wealth.org.
There you go.
There we go. It went into me editing it. So
Did
make sure.
Hey, human, and hit enter. Did you say human in there?
Yeah, I just accidentally hit enter. So, so free assessment tool for your business there at family-wealth.org. So check those things out. Here's my next question for you, Doug. You commented, you said, well, 70% of the U.S. economy is driven by small business and so forth, but that doesn't mean they're organizationally mature. I want to know from you, how do you determine if a organization, a small business, if any company is organizationally mature? There's some key points, because I have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to the show. I have a lot of small business leaders, and I think it's easy when we're on this side to go, well, I'm organizationally mature. My business is awesome. And I've checked all the boxes. But from the outside, from somebody who does a lot of this stuff, how do you determine that? What are 3, 4, 5 things that I can look at as a leader in my business right now to say, yes, we do that, or, oh crap, maybe I need to take a step back and fix this?
Well, I'd back up a second. So I told you before the recording that in my 50s, I went back and got my doctorate, in part because I did my master's at Dartmouth in the 90s. So I'm old. And at that time, it was all practical applications of businesses. How are they, in fact, doing what they think they ought to do? And my research at that time was on risk-taking behavior. That led to a lot of consulting with larger and smaller companies. And my realization that a lot of people are stumbling around, like your question. My dissertation research was on executive coaches, because many will say, there's a talent gap. Doug doesn't know this. Here's the gap. So he's not going to be promoted until, or he's not going to take over the leadership until. And succession planning is a mess sometimes when people have that talent gap deficit approach. Most larger organizations are designed that way. Publicly traded companies are designed that way. I think that's shameful. When most of our money, our value, our wealth, our economy is driven by smaller enterprises, family-owned businesses, it does not mean they need to be organizationally mature with digital protocols like we just described.
Sure.
It does not mean they need monthly performance reviews, because that can be a demotivator.
Sure.
It does not mean they need protocols for behavior and guidance in decision making. What it means to me is you start out being verbal, and then you might write some stuff down, and then you might have it be digital. And now, as we were just discussing, some of that could be workflow automated. That's an example of organizational maturity. Here's the main point. If you've got an auto warehouse guy in Colorado Springs who does not need to have too much structure, he should have just as much structure as necessary, the minimal amount of structure possible. I think about it like an analogy for a bridge. You don't need a massive bridge for a semi to drive over if all you've got is a pickup truck going to the ranch in Colorado. So we build bridges that are scaled. We build houses that are scaled. We should build organizations in a similar way. So maybe the least amount of structure necessary is the answer to your question. Let's imagine that any listener thinks, well, I think I'm pretty good. Maybe you are. Maybe the least amount of structure is all you need, and maybe it never needs to be written. However, most succession planning is not like the HBO stuff, Succession and Landman and Yellowstone and some of those fear-based stories. Most of the time, it's a quiet event, but it's kind of a sloppy event, because elders don't always know how to assess the strengths of the next generation. And the next generation is pretty well educated, They know they've got choices, but they really don't know how to prove their capacity to the older generation. That means they need structure, but they don't need too much structure. So I'm often hired to come in and do an assessment of the complexity, the emotional complexity of a family system, so that they can manage the succession planning transfer with the least amount of structure necessary. And it becomes a good way to have better communication and minimize the conflict. Now, that might sound like a fairy tale because some of your listeners might think, oh, that's not my experience. And let me tell you a story.
Right. There's this one time.
Yeah. And we perpetuate those stories. That's our limbic system, our fear-based driven. But the reality is, when we use our prefrontal cortex, when we consider the options, when we hire a multidisciplinary team of experts, we need a family wealth advisor like myself. It doesn't need to be a PhD necessarily, but it could be a neighbor, a church leader, somebody who understands mediation and the complexity of that process. And we need the family wealth advisors, and we need the legal advisors in that state. If we have a three-legged stool with those three types of multidisciplinary advisors supporting one another, the process is often something that can be done in a year or two. And it's marvelous. It's easy. Easier. It's never easy.
It's never. Well, I mean, you brought up earlier. You said, "Hey, I've got the 70-year-old father and the 50-year-old, I'm guessing, son or daughter. I don't remember if you mentioned, but that they're coming in. How do you navigate where if there's a clash of ideas,
Yep.
Or things that need to change? I mean, obviously, then at one point the 50-year-old's going to be 70, and the next generation's coming in, and so forth. And as ideas change, how do you have them temper themselves? How do you get them to communicate better? How do you do you see a lot of conflict in those things?
Yeah, of course.
Let's talk about that.
Well, we've only got a few more minutes, but I joke that, I played hockey and I reffed a lot of hockey games, and that was good training.
I bet. Yeah, I get it.
Complexity that sometimes exists in family systems. So there's two halves of the coin: emotional complexity and material wealth. It's profound. And a little data goes a long way. So when I'm brought in to mediate that process, you'll like this. I talk about managing three things. The pace is how frequently we'll meet, and that process of engagement at an individual level and a team level. The space is the nature of the interactions together. So individually, I'll have one-to-ones with all the active owners, and the passive owners may be observing and not have a voting right. And they may be married ins because they married in intentionally. They may be widowed, they may be divorced, they may be in substance abuse for the last 10 years or jail. We don't talk about mental illness in family business succession, but we need to. So they need somebody like me to facilitate those conversations.
Sure.
So we got the pace, we got the space, so that we can experience some grace. It could be love, it could be forgiveness, it could be acceptance, it could be estrangement. When there's significant assets, estrangement is sometimes a very reasonable outcome. We're not going to invite so-and-so to Thanksgiving because we anticipate unnecessary conflicts. And we'll communicate regularly, and we'll hope that it's mutual communication, that it's not just one directional. So pace and space and grace is a rubric that I've adopted from some smart people at Stanford, but it's a model for the process of succession planning that is not taught to lawyers or wealth attorneys, wealth advisors. In part because they're focused on the easy stuff. What are the laws in Colorado? And how do we manage the assets in Colorado? That's relatively easy.
Yeah.
How do we manage
what's in writing?
Right. And there are certain constraints and guardrails typically with the trust documents. But the emotional complexity of why is it that you said something mean about my daughter 20 years ago? Mike, you really shouldn't have said that, but I'm going to remember that. That's the stuff that really can cause conflict unnecessarily and requires some skillful leadership.
That's A ton of good information as we are coming down to the tail end here. Here's what I'll ask Doug. And a couple things for anybody that is tuned in and listening. First off, thank you again to our audience and listeners. Do me a favor again, please throw some thumbs up on there. Make sure you share the show. If you know of somebody that would gain some knowledge out of listening to what Doug's had to share today, ton of great information. I got 2 pages worth of notes and stuff. I'll share in the show notes in the description in a little bit. As I've said before, this goes live on Apple Podcasts and Spotify a little bit later this afternoon. We'll clean it up here on YouTube and so forth. But please share that. That's the most important thing. The goal of the show is to grow yourself and then certainly grow the people that are around you. So that it's. I think you've shared a lot of great info today, Doug. Reminders. As I said before, make sure you connect with Doug on LinkedIn. Make sure to check out his website. It's action-learning.com. He shared a couple of other great links with us for JITCoach, justintimecoach.com, and family-wealth.org if you want an assessment there in your business and such. And with that, I would just say, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to take us out with, Doug? Any final thought that we didn't get to today that you're like, man, I wanted to share this thing?
Often when podcasters ask that question, I say, how about 2 words?
Okay.
Practice curiosity.
I love that. Absolutely love that. Well, if you would hang out for just a moment and I will go ahead and take us out. Okay.
My pleasure. Hope it's useful.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to bring us to a close for another episode of the Leadership Toolkit with my new friend, Doug Gray, Ph.D. He is awesome. Ton wealth of information. There's so much stuff here that I could do 2 things. One, I could get into like a 4-hour Joe Rogan style podcast with him, I'm sure, or I could have him back a bunch of times on the show because there's just a ton of great information. He's, from being an author, like I said, check out his websites and check out all of the offerings that he does have. So thank you everybody for taking the time to tune in and join me today. Like I said, I'll update the show notes, share the links and so forth. Please do me a favor, check this out on Spotify, share it with a friend at spotify.theleadershiptoolkit.com. So you can type that right into your phone. I share the video and audio there, as well as YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, you name it. We're all over the place. So thank you, everyone. Until we speak next, I would encourage you, as I always do, stay great. Talk to you soon.